guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my September wrap up. In the month of September I managed to read 7 things, so I was pretty happy with that. September is the month where I go back to work. It's pretty mental at work. You know, you get into the first couple of weeks of September and realise, God, this is difficult, isn't it? Yeah, it just kind of takes over your life a little bit going back to school. So yeah, but we managed to get through it. I still read 7 books. I'm pretty impressed with myself. So we're going to be going through all of the things that I read during the month. I started off the month by reading a couple of books from the Mills and Boon Dare line. I'm doing a video series, or I'm planning a video series where I sort of talk about all the different lines for Mills and Boon and kind of what they encompass, my thoughts on them, some reviews, that kind of thing. So I started off with the Dare series, and I just needed something really light and the sort of thing that I would gobble up at the beginning of the month. So I had a couple of Dare books sitting on my Kindle, so I thought I'm just going to read those. The first of those is a book called Offlimits by Claire Connolly. And this was the one that I preferred out of the two. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and this follows Jack and Gemma. And Jack owns his own business, he's very wealthy, and Gemma works for him, and she is kind of like his personal assistant, but the environment that they work in means that I think they have sort of like offices in this big sort of house that he owns, and so therefore she sees him in a lot more of a personal sort of domestic way than your sort of personal assistant would normally. So she's seen him in bed quite a lot. She's had to drag him out of bed. She's seen various different women go through his life, that sort of thing, and she's always very much been, you know, I can't mix business with pleasure. I need this job. I need to just keep it as it is. But then one day something happens which means that they cross that line. And yeah, the Claire Connolly knows how to build up the tension. She can write a very hot and spicy, explosive sex scene, and just, yeah, the tension in this book was brilliant. I really liked the 2 characters in the book, so both Jack and Gemma, and there was a backstory to both of them, so it wasn't just about them getting together, their relationship. There were things in the way that they had to kind of work through, which I really appreciated, and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I ended up giving it 4 stars. I would definitely recommend this one. The second one that I read was called Getting Lucky by Avril Tremaine, and I would not recommend this one. So this tells the story of a couple who are friends, and I think it's Matt and Romy. They've been friends for an awfully long time. I think they met in college, and Romy is having in the description it says that she's having fertility issues, basically because she's single and she's got to a particular point in her life where, you know, she doesn't want to wait for a man in order to, you know, have a family. She just wants to do it on her own. So she asks Matt to if she can have his sperm, basically. So there's this agreement between the 2 of them. They've already agreed it basically at the beginning of the book, and then at the very beginning of the book, in the first chapter, she comes to his house. I think they live, like, I think he lives somewhere in America and she lives in London, or like the other way around, I can't remember. So she flies over to his house so they can sort of do the transaction sort of thing. But they decide actually that they're going to do it the traditional way rather than, I don't know, with a syringe or whatever it might be. Yeah, and it's about how their relationship develops after that. I didn't like it for a number of different reasons. There was a lot of unnecessary arguments between the 2 of them. I found Matt to be really aggressive, sort of like blowing hot and cold all of the time. The sex scenes were written really weirdly. I didn't really enjoy those. And for a lot of the book, I didn't really believe in the relationship either. Yeah, it just left me feeling a little bit cold, to be honest. So I gave this 2.5 stars in the end. It's probably more like a 2-star. This is one of the Dare books that I wouldn't recommend. Then I read an arc that I had from Mills and Boon, which was Island Fling with the Tycoon by Teresa, I think it's Teresa or Therese Bihari. I was kindly sent this from Mills and Boon as part of my role as being a Mills and Boon insider, so I got a copy from the publisher through NetGalley, so thank you very much to them for sending it to me. And this is, what appealed to me about this story is it's set on it's like an island holiday type story. So our main character is called, I'm terrible with character names, Piper, and she is flying to a Greek island, I forget which one, in order to witness her brother, I think, getting married. Yeah, brother getting married. And somebody is supposed to meet her at the airport. It turns out to be the bride's brother, called Khalib, I think his name is. And you know, there's not much spark between them at the airport, although, you know, it says in the description that sparks fly between them. I really didn't feel that. And then they go to the wedding rehearsal sort of dinner, and there's a little argument between the bride and groom, and then the groom storms off and disappears, and it ends up leaving and going to another island for a little while. So Piper and Khalid basically chase after him and see if they can get him back, like why has he left, like that kind of idea. And then it's about how their relationship sparks from there. This is part of the I think it's the modern romance line from Mills and Boon, and so this is a closed door romance in terms of there are no sex scenes in this at all. Yeah, I found a lot of the dialogue clunky, and I don't know, like it was all a bit dramatic, and I didn't really believe in the relationship between the two main characters. I just didn't get it. And I'm just looking at the review that I put on Goodreads, and so I wrote, while some of the ideas behind the book were interesting, the writing massively let this down. I didn't feel like the main characters had any chemistry, and there were lots of places where the phrasing was off. Yeah, I just really didn't enjoy it at all, so I ended up giving it 2 stars. I wouldn't recommend that one. Then I read The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. This is the first book in the Girl Meets Duke series. I have all 3 books on my Kindle. And actually the 3rd book I got as an ARC, so I wanted to kind of get into this series so I could get to the 3rd book basically. And this is the story of the Duke of Ashbury and a woman called Emma, I think her name is it Emma? Yeah, so Emma, she, at the beginning of the book, it's in the opening chapter, so it's not a massive spoiler, but she goes to visit him at his office, and she's dressed in this really gaudy wedding dress that she has made. And basically she made this wedding dress for the Duke of Ashbury's bride. He was supposed to get married, and then the wedding was called off. And in the meantime, Emma has made this dress and she needs to be paid for it. So she goes to his office as like a bit of a statement sort of thing. You know, I've worked really hard on this dress. I've put all of these hours in. I need to pay my rent. Like, you need to pay me for this dress, basically. And the Duke ends up propositioning her, you know, to marry him. And which is a little bit weird, and Emma's obviously very, very taken aback. But once he's explained the situation, she figures, well, I'm just a vicar's daughter. I, you know, was kicked out of my family home. I'm having to make a living on my own. I'm just about scraping by. You know, she makes a living sewing clothes. She works in sort of like a seamstress's shop, I suppose you would say. So she decides, actually, my life would be an awful lot better if, you know, I married him, and all he wants is an heir, basically. So he wants to get married to her, he wants to, you know, have his son, and then basically she can go off and live her own life separate from him. So she decides this is actually quite a good idea to do this. So they end up marrying, and basically some of his backstory is that he went off to war and was very heavily injured in the war, and all of one side of his face is very heavily scarred. It's one side of his face and one side of his body is very heavily scarred. So he is very, very insecure about himself. He doesn't feel like there is going to be anyone that will love him for who he is. You know, he has encountered lots of people who have had very awful things to say, and they've been sort of shocked and taken aback by his appearance, and he kind of hides away in his house. He doesn't think that he should be involved in society. Like I said, he doesn't feel like anybody can love him because of how, you know, like ugly he is, in his words. Emma has her own story as well, and it's about them falling in love, basically, and the relationship between the two of them is very sweet. I did like the whole thing about him being basically his PTSD, but at the same time, you know, his insecurities about his appearance and stuff like that, and how she brought him out of himself again. You know, the sex scenes were very, very good in true Tessa Dare style, so I definitely recommend it for that reason too. It was just a great historical fiction story, basically, and I ended up giving that one 4 stars. Then it was the contemporary-a-thon, so I managed to read 2 books for the contemporary-a-thon. The first book was The Bride Test by Helen Huang, which is the second book in the Kiss Quotient series. I read the Kiss Quotient last year, I think, or earlier on this year. I can't remember when I read it exactly, but I absolutely loved that book. I thought it was fantastic, really, really enjoyed it, great writing. This book tells the story of, is it Kai? Yeah, and Kai is the cousin of the main character, the main male character in book 1, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. He also has Asperger's, just like, is it Stella? Yeah, Stella did in book 1. So he finds it very difficult to relate to people. He kind of feels like he's always saying the wrong things, that he doesn't really know how to communicate with people properly, like that kind of idea. And at the beginning of the book, his mum basically says that she goes to Vietnam and chooses him a bride and brings her back and says, you know, you've got to marry her. And he says, there's absolutely no way I'm doing that. And she says, well, you know, you'll at least give it a try, sort of thing. If you give it a try for me, then I'll leave you alone in terms of your relationships. So he meets Esme, and Esme's coming over from Vietnam. She's got a little daughter at home. You know, she works as I think a cleaner or a maid in a hotel. Yeah, so she basically wants to make a better life for herself and her daughter, but she doesn't tell him that she has a daughter at the beginning of the book, and then kind of things go on from there. I'm not really sure what to make of this one. I felt like the writing wasn't as good in this one as it was in the first book. After I reflected on that a little bit, I was sort of thinking, well, the fact that the writing was a little bit more stilted and clunky, especially at the beginning of the book, was that because it was supposed to be a representation of how Kai and Esme were interacting, and the sort of awkwardness and the way that Kai finds it really difficult to relate to other people and have conversations and be social and have relationships and all of those kinds of things? Or was it not? And I kind of feel like it wasn't that. I mean, I could be mistaken, but yeah, I didn't connect to the characters as much as I did the characters in the first book. I found some of the writing, like I said, a bit clunky, a a bit cliche at times. Yeah, and it was, but I did like the second half of the book better than I liked the first half of the book. Once the relationship got going and we learnt a bit more about both the characters' backstories, then I felt a bit more connected to their relationship, but I didn't really enjoy it as much as I did the first book. So the first book I think I gave 4.5 stars, this one I gave 3.5, which isn't like a bad rating or anything like that, but yeah, I was a bit disappointed if I'm honest. Okay, then the next book that I read, and the second one that I read for the Contemporary-a-thon, was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin O'Leary Science. And this was for the challenge to read a sort of a beloved book by a member of the book community. And lots of people on BookTube have talked about how good this is. Yeah, and I forgot to say for the Bride test that met like 4 of the challenges, like illustrated cover, diverse book, 2019 release, and yellow on the cover. So this one is about a friendship between 2 boys, Aristotle and Dante. They're both Mexican boys, but they live in America. Is it in Texas or New Mexico or California? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, they start a friendship at the beginning of the book. They meet one summer when I think Dante offers to teach Aristotle how to swim, and it's basically about the friendship that develops between the 2 of them over the course of a couple of years. And it's sort of like a coming of age story, a discovering who you are story. My thoughts about this one. Now, this is a young adult book, and I feel like the way it was written was not really for a young adult audience. Now, I know that you can write a book with different audiences in mind, but this does fall into the YA category. And I kind of feel like at times, well, not even at times, a lot of the way through this, I was sort of thinking, I don't think this would appeal to a lot of young adults because of the way that it's written. It's too metaphorical, if that makes any sense. I think it needed to be a bit more straight to the point for it to appeal to a wider young adult audience. Now, I don't know whether the author intended it for, but you know, it's being published, surely you want it to reach as wide an audience as possible. It had some really important takeaways in here, and it was diverse, and it, you know, so I kind of think that it's important for some a lot of young adults to read, actually, because it has some themes in here that are really important, and also like it's representing certain groups of people, and we need those representations in YA, but at the same time I kind of think this would be lost on a lot of teenagers. I just don't think that they would appreciate it in the way that they should. So in the end I ended up giving it 3 stars. I was actually disappointed by it. I get its power, I understand what he was trying to do, I think it's important, but I just wasn't a big fan of the way that it was written because of the audience that it had in mind. So yeah, it's probably a bit of an unpopular opinion, but it's how I feel. So yeah, I will probably unhaul this because it's not going to be a favourite. Okay, and then the last book that I read in September was Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise by Catherine Rundell. And this was an essay that I saw on my library's ebook service, sort of signed up to read basically, and it finally came through at the end of September. It's about 40 or 50 pages, so it's not particularly long, it's very, very short, and And yeah, so it's got, my husband, you know, he likes to say that I cheat when I count these things towards my reading total. But then it is, you know, my reading goal is 80 and I'm almost there, and it's only the beginning of October. So I just think if there are stuff like this in here, then it's fine because I've made it up with other stuff. I don't care. But anyway, yeah, so this is basically an essay, like it says. Catherine Rundell talks about why it's really important for adults to read children's books. And it's delightful. The way that it's written is so eloquent, and yeah, her turn of phrase is so lovely. And it's just loads of different reasons why it is that adults should read children's fiction and why it's really, really important. And there's not a lot more I can say about it than that, really. If you have the opportunity to pick it up, I would definitely recommend giving it a go. You know, there are lots of reminders in there about why it's so important that you read children's fiction, basically. So yeah, really enjoyed that one, and I ended up giving that one 4 stars. So there you go, guys. They are all of the books that I read in September. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? And then what did you read in September? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.